You were never a god. You were never even a man. You're letting him kill Martha. What does that mean? Cinderella story.
You want answers?
We're on a mission from God.
Inconceivable! Take your sticking paws off me!
I'm afraid I can't do that.
Have fun storming the castle.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Story Cauldron, finding the folktales, fables, and philosophies behind your favorite Hollywood films. I'm Bobby, the movie dude.
I'm Anthony, the philosophy guy.
And I'm Garrett, and I'm here.
And today on the episode of the Story Cauldron, we are joined by Daryl Smith of the Story Geeks Podcast. Introduce yourself, Daryl.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Daryl Smith. I'm one half of the Story Geeks Podcast, along with Jay Shear. And I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys.
Yeah, we're excited as well.
Yeah, this is a podcast that's similar to the Story Geeks in some ways. We love stories here, and for us, we tend to follow in the vein of what J.R.R. Tolkien said about stories, that they're always coming from other places, and so we're trying to explore the roots of the tree, as it were, to use an image that he likes to use, we are trying to look at the ingredients in the soup of the cauldron that is this movie. So what movie are we talking about today, Bobby?
Today is the movie where demigods spend 2 hours talking and 30 minutes punching each other before becoming best friends, and some would say super friends. It's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Yeah. Or after watching the movie again last night, we could also just call this the 3-hour-long preview for the Justice League.
Yeah.
So, Garrett, I'm really excited to hear what you thought about the movie, but give us the synopsis first.
Alrighty, let's do this thing. So, synopsis. Superman's battle with Zod in Man of Steel has prompted a grumpy and grizzled Batman to try and stop the last stop of Krypton before more people are caught in the super-powered crossfire. While Clark Kent tries to unmask Batman and Bruce Wayne tries to silence Supes, Wonder Woman runs her own investigation of Lex Luthor's suspicious research. If all those names seem complicated to you, don't worry. It really doesn't matter in the end, since everyone just punches each other until the boys realize that their moms had the same name, giving them just enough time to crack some jokes and become best friends before Superman dies in battle with Luthor's monster. Of course, there's no way that's going to stick, right?
Which version are you reading that off the back of? Is that like the Target Blu-ray box or something?
Just about, right? I wish that...
Unique description.
Yeah, that's... okay, so I had seen this movie in theaters like the day it came out. I watched it again last night. What about you guys? Bobby...
I pulled a Garrett.
You pulled a Garrett?
So did I.
I watched it this morning.
Dang.
And neither you hadn't seen it before?
I hadn't seen it
Garrett,
before.
You hadn't
There
seen
was
it before?
one that I never really felt compelled to watch, to be honest.
Well, I watched it last night with some roommates because they love the movie. But, see, I wasn't compelled to watch it at all because everyone told me how bad it was.
That's kind of where I was coming from, too.
Mm-hmm.
That they were really let down.
Yeah, so...
What about you, Daryl?
I guess I'll come from the other angle. I've seen this movie, I don't know, 8 or 10 times by now, and
Yes.
I own the
right.
Ultimate Edition, and I actually really love this movie.
I
I recognize there are flaws within it, but I really love it.
Well, good. I'm glad we have some variety. I'm actually more close to Daryl today than I was yesterday. I'm really glad.
Had to watch it again.
I honestly, yeah. I
Spent
had
some time together. We worked through
Some mediation.
there were tears. We're in a good place now. No, after watching it again last night, I almost didn't. I thought, I saw it. I got it. It's fine. And because I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was bad necessarily, but I didn't really care about it. But after watching it again last night and having maybe time to think about it all, I actually found a lot of things in this movie that I really enjoyed.
Well, I think one of my big problems was that I hadn't seen Man of Steel.
well.
And
Yeah,
I was
is a
going
problem.
into it with the Dark Knight mindset.
Also very
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
So I know there's discrepancies in my approach, but yeah, we'll get into all that stuff.
Yeah, and what
Did you guys? Which versions did you watch? I'm just curious. Did you watch the theatrical or the old?
I
Yep.
watched the theatrical.
Theatrical release.
I tried. I wanted to find the Ultimate Edition, but I watched the theatrical one last
Okay.
night. So even
It makes a big difference.
Yeah,
I've
so I
heard
was
that.
told. I got it on Amazon, and everybody was like, "Oh, you didn't get the extended. You messed up." And I was like, "Well, you can just leave."
That is a commitment, though. The extended
It is,
version
yeah.
is it? It's over 3 hours.
Yeah. It's like
3 hours
watching
and 3
Story
minutes.
Geeks. It'll take some time away from you.
Even just watching it, I started watching it last night at 11 o'clock, and I thought this is a mistake. But I'm glad I did because it was good. And what you were saying, Bobby, is evident about how a lot of people had some negative things to say about it when it first came out. It was huge in its opening weekend. It broke all sorts of records. It still holds records for the size of the opening weekend, and unfortunately, it also still holds records for the size of the decline for the second weekend. Because there were a lot of people who were disappointed for some reasons, which might make sense. And I think there are some. This movie does catch a lot of flack that it doesn't really deserve, but it is currently sitting at a 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. Ooh. And I do,
Yikes.
yeah, it
That's
is
fan
not.
or critic?
That's the critics. The fans
Okay.
think it's somewhere in the 60s, which is I think I would probably agree with that. But yeah, the critics, they do not like it. So,
I think it gets treated fairly too. I mean, we don't have to dive into all those reasons, but
it's
I agree. I think it gets the short end of the stick.
and it did not. I think the only awards that it won were.
Yeah.
Bad ones. It was nominated for a Golden Raspberry in almost every category that you can get nominated in. The one kind of positive light that most everybody agreed on was Gal Gadot and Wonder Woman. So,
Yeah.
Which she was awesome.
Yeah,
I gotta give her props
Very
because that
true.
was great.
so
Very true.
okay. Let's see. Now, I think I know the answer to this question, but as far as the comic books that are motivating this movie, the comic books that this story is based on, how familiar are you guys going to be with those? Like I said, I think I know the answer to this, which is to say that now I'm holding up some of them right here. Is this the first time
Really?
you've actually laid eyes on them? Yeah, look at that. See? Boom.
No, I'm
Awesome.
I've laid eyes on them before, but I've also
maybe I'm
been
talking
to your house.
maybe I'm talking to Garrett.
Actually, no. Like last night after watching the film, I was like, okay, I gotta go and brush up on Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman. I was like, I want to kind of fall head into this, not because of the movie, but because of the characters.
Oh, okay. What do you mean?
Because it's already starting to happen. I already talked about this when we did the Thor episode. It was that once I find superheroes or something that I really like, I'm just going to fall all the way in, and I'm going to want to buy all the comic books, and I'm going to want to talk about it all the time, and then I'm going to buy costumes,
Yes.
and it's just not going to be good, and I'm going to be very poor.
Kind of like Anthony with Tolkien.
Well, or with comic
So
books.
that
Or the
started
comic
happening
books.
last night. And I think it's hilarious, too, because if you look at my notes, I've got a little section on Superman, a little section on Batman, and then a full page on Wonder Woman.
Oh, interesting.
So,
Wow.
Interesting.
yeah,
She was
I've
the
been
one
around
that stood
Julie,
up of the three. She was the one that spoke the most interestingly to you.
I think so.
Okay.
Like, I
Why?
don't know. But I think it's just because growing up, it was always Batman and Superman. They were two of like the really, really big ones, and Wonder Woman wasn't brought up as much.
Yeah, I
So
think
for
there's
me,
not
Wonder
as
Woman-
much to compare.
Yeah, exactly. And now Wonder Woman is kind of not necessarily new, but newer in the universal consciousness that everybody has about
Yeah.
That's true.
DC Comics. And so since she's just kind of breaking into that a little more with her own movie and then Batman versus Superman, I think that it's just kind of like, ooh, here's this new thing. It looks hip and cool.
And breaking in so well. I mean, I don't know.
Ooh, she's a queen, truly.
Did
Yeah.
you see the Wonder Woman movie, Garrett?
I have not yet.
You are going to.
I'm
love it.
just I am going to love it. I'm
going
just a
to love
huge
it.
slacker.
I forget. The Story Geeks just did an episode a couple of weeks ago on the top 10 comic book movies.
Yeah.
And I forget. I ranked Wonder Woman. I think I put that at number 5 as like my top. My
very
favorite.
nice.
Because it is an excellent movie.
It is.
I did not have
I have
that.
it at number 3 for me.
Number 3, yeah. And she just, even in this movie, she's only in it for, I think, a grand total of like 15 minutes, but.
She steals the
not
show.
Used super effectively.
No,
I mean,
not really.
we on the Story Geeks, we had an episode, as we're recording this, we had an episode come out today on this movie, and we talked about what we would do to make it better. And that was one of the things we talked about is she could have been used so much better. I mean, she's awesome in the movie, but story-wise, could have been even better.
So I think they really clearly wanted to bring the focus on Batman and on Superman in this film.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to, I don't know if they're trying to split it evenly or not, because ostensibly this movie started as a sequel to Man of Steel, but in some ways it's more a Batman movie.
It's not. Yeah.
I
think Warner Brothers still maintains that it's not a sequel to Man of Steel, and there is still one to come.
Which kind of ruins the completely not surprising ending with the dirt floating up. You know, Superman dying at the end is...
You don't think he's really dead?
Oh, I don't know. I lose sleep over this. But yeah, when you look at the comic stories that are behind this, obviously the huge one is the 1986 classic, The Dark Knight Returns, which I don't know if that's the most... I mean, it's hard to say what the most important or the most popular Batman story is of all time, but there's 2 or 3 that people are always going to mention, and this one's always going to be on the list. I mean, and it really is. It's an excellent story. It's this futuristic setting where Batman is very old and Superman's rather old, and they end up clashing. And stylistically, this movie takes a lot of design cues from that. And a lot of just weird little quirks. When I was watching it last night, I was confused why they kept showing horses in the movie. Like for no apparent reason, there's just suddenly a horse wandering through the rubble, and flipping through The Dark Knight Returns again. You know, there's this iconic scene that I had forgotten about where Batman, right after he beats the mutant leader, he's riding around on a horse, and there's this like great Zorro-like moment where the horse jumps up, and I don't know if this is like an intentional thing or if it's just one of those subconscious sorts of connections. But yeah, there he is. See that?
Oh yeah.
Right there on the horse. See, Gare?
There's the horse.
There he is.
I can see it.
Oh, it's a
Beautiful.
black horse too. I forgot about that.
Boom. Ominous. So let's see. The Dark Knight Returns is going to be a huge one. Obviously, the death of Superman is the other gigantic one, which really surprised me. I think that's something that nobody was really expecting when the movie came out.
I think they tried to hide that.
Yeah.
They tried to keep Doomsday under wraps.
Well, except for they wasn't it in one of the trailers?
Yeah, you're right.
But I mean, it's been over a year
Superman
now.
can't die.
Well, that was honestly, I was listening to a different podcast a few weeks ago talking about how they were arguing that storyline, the death of Superman in 1992, like saved comics as an industry. That it was kind of declining, sales were going down, and so they were trying to come up with this big idea. What could we do to capture everyone's attention? Hey, let's kill the guy who can't be killed and that everybody loves. And it was
really a big deal.
Yeah, it paid off.
I was reading comics then, and I bought those issues off the shelf as they were coming out, and it was a very big deal. Was
it like the kind of thing that like were people talking about it? Or I mean, that was before it was cool to be kind of a nerdy, geeky person.
Yeah, so. I didn't have too many people to talk to about it. But it was a big, I mean, it was it was on the news. I mean, there was no internet then, but it was on the news, and it was in magazines that don't normally talk about comic books, and it was a big deal.
Nice. And so we'll see how much of that comes into play if they do make another. I mean, they're talking about making another direct sequel for Superman, so they'll obviously have to deal with some of the fallout. There's plenty that they. I think it would be really cool if they did bring in Steel or some of those other characters that came in the wake of that storyline.
There's some elements of that in the Justice League trailer. Like you see a newspaper that says "A World Without Hope," which was the storyline after Superman died, before he came back. So they're playing with that a little bit.
And they're clearly not hesitating to throw together a bunch of massive storylines. I think like that's one of the things that shook me about the movie the first time I watched it. It's like
it's very Story Cauldron-esque.
It's just the Dark Knight Returns is this huge. There's so much to do with it.
Yeah.
And then the death of Superman. There's so much to do with that. And okay, let's just do all of that together in less than 3 hours. Or in just over 3 hours in the Ultimate Edition.
It still feels like they're kind of trying to play catch up to Marvel.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Because Marvel's had 10 years to hit all their big story points and do Civil War and the Winter Soldier and Infinity War and all this big stuff. And DC's trying to catch up over the course of like 2 movies. So it's like, let's throw all our big stuff in, you know.
Let's jump on that money train.
Yeah, Marvel's got that long game in mind with all their phases, and they're like, well, we should probably jump on that train.
And it did. It did make a profit. The movie did make a good amount of money, but still, it's... I feel kind of awkward about the movie because... Before it came out, I had a chapter in a book talking about Batman and Superman and philosophy, and I was reading the chapter I wrote this morning, just kind of cringing because I talked so highly, because the movie hadn't come out yet, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be the best movie, this is going to be the most exciting thing ever, I can't wait for it, and I'm like, oh, and now I go back and I'm like, well, maybe you should have toned that back a little bit, But maybe I just need to watch it more. Maybe once I get up to Daryl's 8 or 9 or 10 times, maybe I'll be completely in love with it. I would say there are two other comic stories that actually have a weird kind of connection to this. One is the 2003 series, limited series by Mark Millar called Red Sun, which is an Elseworld story. What that means is that you've got these characters, like you were saying, Garrett, that you love. You love Superman, you love Batman, you love Wonder Woman. So let's just change everything up and talk about them as if they were in a different setting now. Let's put them in this alternate universe. And Superman Red Sun is a story about what would have happened if Superman landed in Russia instead of in Kansas. And if he was raised by the communist collective rather than by the Kents. And it might be my favorite Elseworld story. Daryl, have you read Sun?
It's been a long time, but yeah, I've read it.
I think there's a few visual cues from there also, and like Batman's costume in the nightmare sequence in the movie. When he's wearing that jacket and the goggles and everything, that's basically what Batman looks like in this. And apparently, go ahead.
Oh, I think that story takes some cues from The Dark Knight Returns also, because, in The Dark Knight Returns, you see Superman being kind of the United States government superhero,
Yeah, working for Reagan.
So, yeah, that's right, Reagan.
But weirdly enough, Henry Cavill, how do you say his name? Henry Cavill?
I would say Cavill.
Cavill?
Yeah, same.
When he got the part of Superman in Man of Steel, he said that this was one of the books that he read to kind of help him form Superman's character, which I thought is kind of weird because this isn't the Superman you would normally think of. He's not. Yeah. He's not the golden. He's not necessarily like an evil character. He actually manages to turn Lex Luthor into a good guy. Honestly, I don't really want to talk about this one too much because I want you to go read it so you can experience this. The ending of it blows me away. It's a good story. But there's that. And then the last thing that I think might be kind of a weird mention, but Batman Arkham Asylum, which is a Grant Morrison story that came out in 1989. And it's on that list with The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke for, what's the best Batman story of all time. Arkham Asylum gets brought up a lot. This is it's a story that explores the psyche, Batman's crazy mind, and he's diving deeper and deeper into this house, fighting his demons in the form of his villains, his rogues gallery. But there's a lot of, I think, Batman's rage in this movie. A lot of Batman's personality in Batman v Superman looks a lot like Batman's personality in this Morrison story. And the whole thing with the spear. There's this kind of beautiful moment in Arkham Asylum. Well, that might be a weird way to describe it, but he's fighting with Killer Croc, and they recreate this statue of Saint Michael fighting the dragon, or fighting the devil, and Batman takes the spear out of the statue and actually uses it to fight with Killer Croc. And so when you've got Batman fighting the devil, you've got Lex Luthor in the movie talking all about how Superman's the devil and Batman's fighting him, and he's got this spear. I think there's some connections here too. So
that blows my mind. So cool.
There's so much going into it that I just feel unprepared for this episode.
I know, same.
Well, what do you guys think of then? Because I've been doing plenty of talking. When you think of Superman, and what kinds of things come to mind? Because you're right, these characters have been around for 70, 80 years.
At least.
So
this is going to sound terrible, but the first thing I think of when I think Superman is, why are you wearing your underwear on the outside of your clothes?
Fair enough.
But that's just because that was the joke growing up. And then Batman, I just think, of all my friends, because all of my friends are obsessed with Batman.
Yeah. And as for me, it's I don't really think of Superman too much, other than this is going to be a little weird, but my mom, she really liked the show Smallville.
Oh, yeah.
So there was that.
True.
And
True.
I was a big fan of the early 90s Batman movies. I just...
like
the Tim Burton.
The Tim Burton
movies, yeah.
All of them that we still have on VHS.
Yeah. And those are the ones that I would watch, but...
At first I thought you said late 90s Batman movies, and we were going to have to fight, but...
Oh, yeah, all those animated classics.
The Joel Schumacher movies where Batman's like on LSD.
Yeah.
I mean the Batman toy commercials.
Yes, yeah, that's more accurate.
Yeah.
No,
let's just see how stupid we can get Tommy Lee Jones to look.
That's the one. But yeah, that's what I think about. And then, of course, my grandfather was into comics a little bit, and he was the one that got me started on Marvel. So I never really had too much exposure to DC comics.
So you were more the Marvel guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about you, Daryl? You read a lot of comics. Were you an equal opportunity comics reader, or were you more partisan with DC and Marvel?
I definitely led more towards DC growing up. I got into comics through discovering a story called Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is a classic, which I think actually informs a lot of Batman vs. Superman too. So I sort of got into it with this idea of hundreds of characters thrown into one story, which if you ask Jay about comic books, he will tell you that he hates those stories.
Oh, really?
He likes to focus on one character. He hates it when there's all these other characters muddying things up. I love that because that's just kind of where I started. But yeah, I grew up reading mostly DC, loving Batman. Nightwing is actually technically my favorite comic book character.
Mm-hmm. So are you
Nightwing being the grown-up version of Robin, of Dick Grayson.
So do you think, what do you think the chances are of Nightwing showing up in one of these future DCEU movies, given the fact that they really seem to imply that he's had some kind of horrible thing happen to him?
Well, that's unclear, because in Batman v Superman, we hear of a dead Robin, but it could also be Jason Todd. It could be the second Robin, which is the one that actually died in the comics. And
in The Dark Knight Returns, they mentioned that was kind of the pivotal point for Batman. The death of Jason Todd kicked him out of the world. So
Right.
man.
And I mean, I hear they're working on a Nightwing movie. I hear it is happening.
really?
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and they're doing a Titans TV show
Yes.
that
And
Nightwing is involved with.
you've got to have
So-
him in that. You think Nightwing,
Yeah.
not Robin, in the Titans show?
It might be Robin at first. I think it's about his journey turning into Nightwing.
Excellent.
So, I mean, I'm excited for that. The only live action Dick Graysons we've had are Burt Ward and Chris O'Donnell. And Chris O'Donnell was
Yeah.
terrible. And Burt Ward, he was great for what they were doing, and he had his charm. But I want to see something different, you know?
Holy serious acting, Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be a really funny movie. Garrett, don't watch any of the old Batman shows because I want to be with you when you watch Batman with Burt Ward and with Adam West. That's the Batman show from the 60s where
See, I've seen like one
West.
episode of that.
Oh my God.
it's beautiful.
It's great.
I literally watched that as a kid because we lived overseas, and that show, like we had the
It was
weirdest
new.
options. No, seriously, we had the weirdest options for television programs to watch, and that was one of them. So we would watch. And I imagine it was very similar to how kids watched it in the States back in the 60s because there was only one TV channel, and all the kids in my school would watch the same channel, and then go to school and we'd talk about, oh, did you see the Riddler got this and the thing? Oh, yeah. So, but I love that you mentioned Crisis on Infinite Earths because I'm definitely on your side in this. The two comic book stories that I fell in love with as a kid that kind of introduced me to comics were actually Crisis on Infinite Earths and the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. I had both of those,
which is like the Marvel Crisis.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the two stories where let's just throw. I mean, Infinity Gauntlet did have to kill half the universe first, but you're still just throwing everybody in together. So yeah, I mean, and that's the one that the MCU is really following.
Yeah,
with Thanos building up to all Infinity War. So we'll see how that plays out. I can't tell you the words that fell out of my mouth when they showed Thanos at the end of the Avengers the first time. I was glad my grandma wasn't sitting there with me because it was oh man, I was just so unbelievably excited. But
and how many words would come out if you knew then how long you were actually going to have to wait in order to see him again?
Yeah, seriously. I mean, they just kind of tease you a little bit here and there, but we'll get that next year. Next year, yeah. But still, well, let's see. When we're talking about Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, it's interesting, Garrett. What kinds of things are you noticing about where these characters are coming from? Because the three, there's a lot that we can say about Superman and Batman, and there's something in particular that I want to get us back to. But Wonder Woman, it would be wrong for us to skip over her. We need to talk about her some.
Oh, definitely.
So what are we thinking about where she's coming from? This one might actually be one of the easiest ones to answer.
Just in this film?
Well, such as we can. I mean, there's not a lot about her origin in this film other than that weird picture that isn't really explained in the movie. But
well, my thoughts of this film and Wonder Woman were just kind of like, she knows that something's up. You know, she's going out and figuring her stuff out. And then at the end, it just seemed like, okay, boys, you need to pipe down and let's, like, you know, save the world because you guys are being really petty and we need to get through this.
yeah,
Like, she basically came in and started mothering the two, Batman and Superman, and was like, boys, we have a job. You are wasting time.
Yeah, did you notice how they keep cracking jokes back and forth with each other, and she's like just shaking her head and then punching Doomsday again?
I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So this is going to be kind of weird because I automatically always think of the old series, Wonder Woman series.
Oh, with Linda Carter?
Yeah, so they're kind of fighting in my head right now, the representation in either one.
Oh, I see.
So, but no, there's she comes in as kind of like the cleanup crew, I feel like, in this movie, and it's more or less setting her up for a huge role down the line. which she has her own movie, and I feel like she's going to be huge in the upcoming Justice League movie.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. And I think that would make the creator of Wonder Woman very happy. William Moulton Marston was a psychologist who, his story is just fascinating. I mean, they just made a documentary about, like a biographical documentary about his life, which apparently it's kind of raising some hairs on some people's necks because the family apparently is not fond of it. It sounds like the family was not really involved with the making of the movie, and so they're casting some pretty heavy aspersions on its accuracy. But when you read, there have been a few biographies of the character and of the creators. The creator, he was very intentionally trying to create a feminist superhero 75 years ago when feminism was not really a popular thing. And it can get a little sensationalized because, you know, his personal life, he was married, but then the two of them had a live-in girlfriend, and they had some very, what might we say, libertarian views on things like sex and marriage. And understandably, some people want to really blow those kinds of things out of proportion. But as far as the character goes, you can see the some of these more, for lack of a better word, progressive attitudes really filtering into presenting a strong female character who, like you were saying, is not just following but leading the guys into a new kind of tone. And he wanted to marry some of these feminist ideas of strength and freedom along with Greek myths. I mean, he really drew quite heavily on a lot of Greek mythology to create this island of Themyscira where she's from. And none of that is in Batman v Superman because, again, this is basically just showing off, hey, she's a thing and she's going to be important at this next movie that we want you to go see. But
has your curiosity been piqued?
I think it's hard not to. Honestly, the scene where she shows up with the shield, blocking saving Batman, like you think oh my gosh. If you don't get excited.
And the music?
Absolutely. If you don't get excited at that scene, you must be asleep because that has got to be the best. That may have been that scene covers a multitude of sins. Can we put it that way? when it comes to this movie, it's the first time. Not only is it the first time that Wonder Woman has been on the cinematic screen, but it's the first time that all three of what DC calls their Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, are standing together, fighting, smiling. I mean, it's just such a beautiful moment. One of those moments that I'm sure comic book readers have been waiting for, literally for decades.
Yeah, my whole life.
So I think most of what we can talk about, though, is going to be from Superman and Batman's side. Now, have either of you, or have any of you, I'm used to too, so have any of you ever read or heard of some of the older pulp fiction characters like John Carter or Zorro or Dick Tracy?
Yes, indeed.
So what do we know about those guys?
Basically,
pick one
about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Like, you know that they're people.
I know that they're things. I've, yeah, we'll go with that because everything that I know about those Pulp Fiction type characters is pretty. I've got nothing. Really.
Okay.
Well,
it's very
Zorro
surfacey. Other than
was
Zorro.
actually the first word that I was able to read when I was like 4.
Just because he recognized the Z. That's it.
Yeah, basically.
Wow.
Television guide. Gotta love it.
Yeah, the 1950s
Wait, hold on.
Zorro.
That's what you were learning to read with, was a television guide?
Well, my parents
on the
would flip
TV.
through it and they'd be like, guess what these words are?
All right. So did you watch any of there have been quite a few adaptations of Zorro.
I think we've seen them all.
But it's been a while.
Yeah. Because when it comes to Batman, if you're looking at the kinds of characters that are influencing the creators of Batman, Zorro is one of the high watermarks of the tradition. There, he's this rich guy who dresses up at night to fight bad guys. That's Zorro, and that's Batman. Now, granted, Batman has cooler toys, and Zorro has probably a better sense of humor. But
and Zorro is actually, I mean, it depends on whose interpretation of Batman's origin you're reading, but Zorro most of the time is the movie that Bruce was going to see with his parents, after which they got killed.
Yeah. If you pay attention in
right at
Batman
the beginning,
v Superman, they know they have it on the posters that they're walking past when they get shot. And
Chris Nolan went a different way with it. He made it an opera, but most other interpretations is they're watching Zorro.
Yeah, Zorro, and then I think I remember seeing Excalibur on the wall next to it.
Yeah, I noticed that. I wondered if that was something else. I mean, it's intentional, but if there's some connection there. But Zorro, and there's another character that also gets mentioned called the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Love him.
Yeah,
what do you know about the Scarlet Pimpernel?
I had to read that in high school.
Oh, really? Did you talk about the Batman connection in high school?
I don't remember. I don't think we did.
I know I didn't.
English.
We were talking about it a little bit more because it was the same year that we read Taming of the Shrew. And it was like we read those two back to back.
Oh, interesting.
And it was more talking about the time period that it was set in and the dramatic storyline, blah, blah, blah. But I have read it.
Okay.
Haven't listened to the musical, though.
There's a musical?
Oh, I didn't know there was a musical.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
There's always a musical.
Yeah. Is it a popular musical?
No, probably not, considering I haven't listened to it.
That's true.
That is true, yeah. But the Scarlet Pimpernel, it was...
the French Batman.
The French...
Basically.
Yeah. He kind of... I don't know if it's fair to say he's the very first, but he's the first contemporary kind of story where it, just like Zorro, just like The Shadow, just like Batman, rich guy dresses up and punches things. But then you also have characters like Dick Tracy and Sherlock Holmes. So the guys who created Batman, Bill Finger and Bob Kane, they're saying we want this guy to be a detective. He's not just punching people. He's the world's greatest detective is what he ends up coming.
Batman started out as just Detective Comics, right?
Well, that's where
that's
where he got his start, aka DC, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Hey.
Like no real cover for Batman. It's
but then on the Superman side, if you go back to the turn of the century, you've got all of these I haven't read a lot of Pulp Fiction stories, but I think of all these different covers, these different pictures of the real strong guy who's usually in a mostly ripped off shirt, maybe saving some girl, swinging on a vine over quicksand.
Wrestling tights.
Yeah, right. And one in particular, though, was a guy named John Carter, a character named John Carter, who was invented by Edgar Rice Burroughs of Tarzan fame.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They tried to make a movie of John Carter not too long ago, which I think most people have just tried to forget about.
One of the biggest bombs in history, I heard.
Really?
They spent a ton of money on it, and it did terrible.
It was one of those movies.
I'm so excited to watch it now.
It's worth watching just to... I mean, it's not great, but it's fun to watch to see kind of... Not the train wreck. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's just to see all this effort put behind this movie that just went nowhere.
Yeah, it was in production for a long time.
Kind of like a Riff Tracks movie, right?
Oh, I bet that would be hilarious.
That would
must be that.
There might be one.
But the whole idea of John Carter in the original story was that he's this guy who winds up almost like Robinson Crusoe on Mars. And because Mars is, the gravity situation on Mars is kind of different, he has not exactly superpowers, but he's stronger than usual. He can jump really far. And so he has these abilities which look really similar to the abilities that Superman had when he first came on the scene. And Superman over the years has gradually turned more and more into Jesus. Originally, he was just kind of this guy who he didn't fly. He was able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And he was not faster than light or whatever. He was faster than a speeding bullet. And,
which is faster than a normal bullet.
Yes, well, yeah, he's in a hurry to get somewhere. But he looks an awful lot like this John Carter character. And there's a debate. I found a book on my shelf that I've not actually read, which I think if we ever do a podcast on Man of Steel or something, I'll have to look at this. It's called Is Superman Jewish? And it's exploring the Jewish roots of the characters, not the characters, of the authors, of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Anyway, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who were, the argument is that these guys use some of their religious faith to influence some of the characters, even going so far as to maybe bring in the name of God for their character, Kal-El, El being the Hebrew word for God. So I think, do you guys know what I mean when I say he's gradually turned more and more into Jesus?
No, I see it.
Yeah.
Where he's...
as far as like his power and his abilities, there's some very foundational disconnections there that disqualify him from being Jesus. But,
yes.
But yes.
But basically every iteration gets exaggerated. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, he literally gets hit with a nuclear bomb and then just shakes it off in the sunlight. I mean, that's what I mean.
You see it a lot in this film. They keep talking about, like, he's God, especially Lex Luthor, because, he's psychotic. But it just, everyone keeps referring to him as, like, this higher being.
Yeah. And there's so many shots of him, like, hovering above people, like on top of their house in this raging flood, and he's hovering above them, and they're like worshiping him, and it's like, why don't you fly down there and save them? Like,
quick question about that too.
Stop hovering.
If you're on top of a house and you're flooding, I feel like a can of paint would be one of the last things that you would grab. I thought about that. I'm like, wait a minute.
But Zack Snyder really wants it to be a good shot.
Just wants it to be epic.
Yeah, well, I think he succeeds, I guess. I don't know. I think you don't see it as much in this one. Man of Steel was notorious for the Christ imagery, where you've got Superman literally flying with his arms outstretched to the side, where he looks like he's on a cross.
And hovering above the world, listening to people's cries beneath him.
Yeah, they're totally not praying to him, though.
No, of course not.
Of course not. So,
but yeah, too on the nose.
It gets close with Lex Luthor, getting on the nose, like you said, Garrett. Basically calling him God, but not. That's the part of the movie that's rough for me. I don't like Lex Luthor. I have to be honest.
Am
I alone in that?
Way better.
Jesse Eisenberg is good at a lot of things, but Lex Luthor was not really one of them.
I don't know. The entire time, it took me so long to figure out he was the bad guy, because I'm not well versed in comics at all. So I'm sitting next to my roommate Ryan, and I just stop and go, "Wait, he's the bad guy, right?"
So what was it that
be like so smart that he's dumb?
Which part was it that made you realize, oh, he's evil?
He had to give the speech at the museum.
That part? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't the creepy Jolly Rancher thing?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Oh, my gosh. And you know that wasn't in the script. That was just Jesse Eisenberg being creepy.
I still don't get the point. It's just so weird.
I think Jesse Eisenberg plays one character really well, but it's the same
Mark
character
Zuckerberg.
in every... Yeah, exactly.
Mark Zuckerberg. I liked him in Zombieland.
Yeah,
but
he's the
same same character.
Now You See Me, sure. But anyway.
It's not...
Although, there is one possibility that I'm really hoping for, and this might be a long shot, but I know I'm not alone in guessing this. In the comics, Alexander Luthor is not necessarily the same person as Lex Luthor. They're to make a long story short, it goes back to Crisis on Infinite Earths, actually.
Yeah.
Alexander Luthor is the son of Lex Luthor from another dimension. And
he's actually a good guy.
He's actually, yeah. Well, at first.
In that story, he is. In a sequel later on, he turns out to not be.
But there's all of the first like half dozen scenes that he's in, he keeps talking about his dad. And so there's this possibility that maybe the real Lex Luthor is still out there, not behind bars, and this is just the crazy son who has the same name.
And who has hair.
A popular theory.
I like
Jay
that
and
theory.
I both desperately want it to be true.
Yeah, I'm on your team here.
Yeah.
But I think his comments about God, let's talk about that maybe. We can come back to the to Batman in a minute. His comments about God, when they're on the roof, when it's really clear that he's the bad guy, he makes some comments about God being good and God being powerful and God being evil. What did you think about that scene?
God being all powerful, so he can't be all good.
Yeah. What did you think about that?
I don't even know. It was a lot to take in, because half the time you're like, wow, this guy is really crazy, and like, I don't want to listen to him talk. And then he says something that's like profound like that, and you're like, oh, now I have to actually think.
Like you didn't want to be paying attention to him.
Yeah.
The spastic movements, and then
so many.
Okay.
I think it depends on how you look at that scene, because if they're writing it intentionally to show Lex Luthor's twisted view of the world and kind of his skewed view, then it's a good scene. Because if you think about it, like the whole idea of if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good, and if he's all good, he cannot be all powerful. In reality, you would think that, I mean, depending on your faith, you would think that only God can be all powerful and all good at the same time.
Yeah.
And Lex Luthor is really talking about man. Man cannot be all good and all powerful. Yeah. And so if you accept that it's from his skewed point of view and it's his obsessiveness with power and he really wants to be God, and it's really just all about his fear of Superman, then you can kind of think, okay, that's a good scene. But if it's meant to be a commentary on God, then that's way off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what he's referencing is something that anybody who has taken a
Philosophy 101.
A Philosophy of Religion 101 class is going to recognize, because it's one of those things that it's been around for so long and it has a name. It's called the problem of evil. And it goes back at least as far as the 4th century. There's a Greek philosopher named Epicurus who might not even have been the first person to talk about it, but he put it rather succinctly, and it sounds basically like what Luther says, that if God is omnipotent and omniscient and perfectly good, then you can't say that evil exists. Whence cometh evil, to put it like David Hume would say. And this is actually called the logical problem of evil now, that there's a lot of philosophers of religion who work on this, who try to say, well, yeah, this is an interesting contradiction in the properties of what we talk about when we talk about God. Normally, a lot of folks are going to, anybody coming from the monotheistic Abrahamic traditions are going to be looking at God as being omnipotent, all-powerful, and omniscient, all-knowing, and perfectly good. So wouldn't God both be able to and desire to stop evil? So why doesn't he? I will say that there are not a lot of people who necessarily buy the logical problem of evil anymore. I think that there are quite a few ways that various philosophers and theologians have tried to answer that. The process of doing that is called theodicy. You present some kind of explanation to say, well, here might be some reason why God would allow evil. Maybe this evil thing isn't really evil. You might say it that way. You're just looking at it badly, that we have the wrong perspective on it. Or maybe this evil is good or it's required to bring about some other greater good. Without this evil thing, the good wouldn't be possible. This probably has to do with the fact that I have a small kid, but an example would be like childbirth. Childbirth, really, really painful. But there's a good thing that comes around at the end of it. And so the one is necessary for the other. Now, there are other ways to talk about evil, and I think there's it's sometimes called the evidential problem of evil. Like, why does so much bad stuff happen? Maybe that explains why the idea of evil can happen, but why so much? And that's a more interesting, complicated mess of questions. But I think that you're right, Daryl, that I don't think that Zack Snyder's trying to do philosophy with that scene. I think it's another example of him talking about Superman. I mean, he's talking about Superman as God every other time that he uses the word. And, using it kind of cynically, sarcastically, like, yes, you're not really God. But, and I don't know if maybe it was just them running out of time. That at the very end, when he's in the cell and he's talking about he's coming. Do they flesh that out much more in the Ultimate Edition? Like what?
There's a little bit more to that scene, but
they don't really hint at who he's talking about.
For me, this gets into one of those things of, was this movie made for the general public or was this movie made for comic fans?
Oh.
Because there's stuff in the movie. So the nightmare sequence where Superman, there's all those demons all over the place and Superman ends up killing Batman.
Yeah.
There's a symbol on the ground. There's an Omega symbol, which is the symbol of Darkseid, which is this giant villain in the DC. He's kind of like the DC Thanos, I guess, if you want to talk in Marvel terms. But if you're a comic fan based on the clues in the movie, I think when Lex Luthor says he's coming, he's talking about Darkseid. That's my take.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Yes, absolutely.
I don't think he's talking about Superman.
Yeah, 1,000 times, yes. And Darkseid often describes himself as a god. He is the god of apocalypse. He's like an evil god.
Yeah.
But he is. I mean, so that's what's kind of churning in my head here. How Luthor hates Superman, but it's not really clear if he's excited for this maybe Darkseid or whoever he's talking about. If he's if he just hates Superman so much that he wants to destroy the world in order to get to him.
I think we have to know more about Lex Luthor in the coming movies, I think. But Darkseid's version of power and control probably seems a little bit more attractive to Lex because it's more what he has in mind because he's sort of twisted and messed up. And clearly that's sort of the picture of control that we see he got from his father in the movie. His father was cruel and harsh to him. And so I think he's afraid of Superman because Superman challenges his worldview. But Darkseid fits within his worldview, as horrible as that is.
Oh, that's right. I wrote this down, actually. A quote from that rooftop scene where he's arguing and talking about the problem of evil. Luthor says, the world only makes sense if you force it to. And that's that sense of power is exactly what Darkseid's whole drive in the comics is this anti-life equation, which forces people to do exactly what you want them to. It destroys their free will. So we'll see. I mean, I think if they don't, you've got parademons flying around in the nightmare sequence. You've got,
and Steppenwolf is the villain of the Justice League movie.
Honestly, where else are they going to be going if not to Darkseid?
I really think we're going to see Darkseid in the Justice League movie.
Maybe
if you watch the trailers, it's the same footage over and over and over again. Clearly, there's more to this movie than they're showing us.
I hope that maybe they learned something from giving away Doomsday in the trailers for Batman v Superman.
Yeah, seriously.
That would be nice. I have to say, especially after Wonder Woman, I'm a lot more excited for the Justice League movie than this. But I know we're running low on time, and there is one more huge thing that if we don't talk about this, then we're doing a disservice to the story Cauldron, and that's the name Superman.
Oh yeah, Ubermensch.
The Ubermensch. So there's There's a philosopher that we haven't really talked a lot about in previous episodes. We've mentioned Nietzsche before, Friedrich Nietzsche. This German philosopher who was actually quite literally insane at the time of his death. He spiraled into insanity, brought on by some variety of diseases, and
just needed to laugh a little more.
Well, yeah. So he had this idea. I appreciate Nietzsche quite a lot. I think he's wrong on basically everything, but
except for when it comes to music.
Basically everything.
Yeah. True.
But I do think he's wonderfully consistent, because if you grant him one thing, if you agree with just one basic premise of his, then pretty much everything else that he says actually makes a lot of sense. That God doesn't exist. I think he's wrong about that. But if you agree that God does not exist, I think a lot of what else Nietzsche goes on to say follows, because he basically says God is dead. We have killed him. What is left for us to do now, basically? So there are no rules. All bets are off. All that matters is your strength, like we were saying just a minute ago. It's all about power and the will to power. Whoever is strongest is actually objectively better, because there's no other standard to measure anything by other than strength.
So if you're familiar with Ayn Rand, then...
Did we talk about Nietzsche in the Ayn Rand episode?
Yeah. A lot of similarities, but back to Übermensch.
But the Übermensch is his idea of the... if humanity has a reason for existing, it's to birth the Übermensch. He would still be skeptical of that, because, again, there's no ultimate meaning for really anything for Nietzsche. But he actually describes humanity as a bridge between, or he describes it as a rope, or like a rope bridge between the beast and the overman, a rope over an abyss. And an overman or a Superman are two different ways to translate that German word Übermensch. That one day there's going to be this person who's going to come, and he's going to be strong and beautiful and charismatic, and he's going to force everybody to do what he wants, because he's going to be objectively stronger than them. And it's really what a lot of people, it's certainly what Bruce Wayne is concerned that Superman is going to be at the beginning of the movie, before the whole Martha incident, which that actually made more sense this time, but maybe we shouldn't get too distracted about that.
Martha.
So let me put it to a question. Let me put it to you as a question. When it comes to this idea of the Übermensch, which I've breezed through in a far too short of a fashion, do you think that Superman or Batman would better qualify as being this strong character who is powerful, who has a strong will, who
more or less forces their will onto others,
or who at least has the ability to do that? And because he has the ability, Nietzsche would say he has the right, but
Nietzsche.
We don't necessarily have to agree with him on that. But of those two, do you think that Batman or Superman would better fit the slot?
It seems that Superman fits it physically.
Yeah.
But it seems that psychologically, Batman might fit it better. Because Superman, you sort of have the feeling that he's more of a protector. Like, he's not necessarily trying to come in and exact his will. But Batman is, his parents were killed. He's pissed. He wants to rid the world of crime,
He's branding people now, apparently.
Yeah.
So, I totally agree with that. That's actually where I was kind of...
So you want to bring a mishmash of them together?
Frankenstein these two
together. Well, actually, you could say you could Nietzsche them together.
Them together.
Because Nietzsche describes in his book on the birth of tragedy, he actually talks about these two competing forces. The Apollonian and the Dionysian forces.
Oh, finally.
Yes, finally.
It's like oil and water.
Yeah. The Dionysian force is there are these two competing forces that create art. He thinks that real art is what happens when you get these two different, they're not exactly energies. You can almost think of them kind of like the Force in Star Wars. It's like a thing, but it's not really a physical thing. It's just like this. It's like these spirit of inspiration. And the Apollonian is rigid and structured, and it's very rational. He says in a song, the Apollonian force is what gives you the lyrics and the beat and the meter. But then the Dionysian is the passion, and it's the wild fervor, and it's the emotion that goes into
it's the right
song.
brain versus the left brain.
Yeah, and when you bring the two together, you've got the Apollonian and the Dionysian together, that's when true art is really accomplished, he says. And I think we could talk about Superman and Batman in a very similar way. I mean, there's been quite a few stories where Superman has been compared to Apollo, the sun god in Greek mythology. Have you read All-Star Superman?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's another Grant Morrison story, the same guy who did Arkham Asylum. Did you like All-Star Superman? Do you remember?
I liked the first half of it more than the second half. You know, didn't they literally bring a character named Apollo into that towards the latter half of it? Or
yeah, he's one of the guys that time travels, I think.
Yeah.
But
I
then
think when they got to that part, they started to lose me. But the whole idea that Superman was dying and that his powers were killing him and this and like that was really interesting. But
yeah, I thought
Grant Morrison can take a turn on a dime and just lose you real quickly.
Yeah, I'm sure it makes
writer.
perfect sense to him, but I don't think I do enough drugs to understand all of what Grant Morrison is into. Anyway, but you've got in stories like that, you've got Superman as this sun god. You know, he's powered by the sun. He is Apollo, and then Batman, this dark, brooding, passionate creature of the night, where so many of his rogues are these psychological torments that that's been analyzed to death. So when you bring these two guys together, I think it's in some ways maybe my first question was kind of unfair. I don't think it's right to actually have to pick which one's the real Ubermensch, because it's when the two of them come together, and that's why I was so excited about this movie, or the possibilities for this movie. It's like to bring these two characters together, you've got everything that makes for a good story. It's yin and yang.
Yeah.
So.
Oh dear, I feel so enlightened and so dumb because I haven't watched any of these movies yet.
Well, I did.
Means you have hours of fun coming to you.
And I'm
so stoked.
Sounds like your roommates are going to be excited too. I did think of you last night when I was watching this again, and I was laughing for like the first 20 minutes because I just said, I'm sure Garrett has no idea what's going on.
You weren't wrong.
So, all right, well, this is another one of those episodes where I'm just gushing and gushing and gushing.
Hey, you know what? I'm out of my element on this one. I just barely watched it this morning, so I didn't have too much to go off of.
In our last couple of minutes here, let me ask you a question. I know that you will have an opinion on. If John McClane was going to fight Batman, how do you think he would do?
Oh man, see, I feel like this would be something amazing for my students to debate. I don't know, because you're talking about like without suits, right?
Yeah,
without suits. It's more of a battle of wills at that point.
Just because you think they're equally matched.
Yeah, in that respect, yeah. Because I mean, John McClane can't die.
Apparently not.
He just keeps coming back for more and more movies. Yeah, I don't know. See, that's.
I think this might be the one time where I'm going to disagree with you on this. I think Batman would beat John McClane.
Well, yeah, I guess with all the, Rajan Ghul training and.
Well, yeah, I mean
he has some big arms.
Ho ho ho! I have a machine gun.
I did notice that. Yeah, watching the movie again, I thought that the first part of their fight, where Superman is kind of depowered, I thought that was actually really well done because it showed that Superman really is a bad fighter. And it made me think, he probably never had to learn how to fight because he could just take a punch and then, punch somebody into the next county, and so when it actually comes down to technique and skill, he doesn't have any, and Batman really beat him up. So
I just meant to brush my shoulder, and I'd knock this guy into next county.
So, okay. Well, anything else that we want to hit on?
Martha.
Oh, we didn't even talk about Martha. I will admit, before sitting in the theater, I had never put it together that they shared the same name. I never
same,
thought of that.
Same.
I never really did either.
Which, it was one of those moments in the theater like, no, that's not. Oh, that is right. How have I? Oh, my. Now I don't
It bugs me, though, because I think it makes people miss the point. Like,
oh,
it's not the fact that their moms are both named Martha.
Right.
Snaps him back. It humanizes Superman, and his mother's alive, and
Yeah, and
the name thing overtook it, sort of.
Yeah, I feel like I'm starting to see that what more I play the movie over in my head, and especially that opening scene where we see Batman's origin yet again.
I thought they did it well, though.
They did it really, really well.
Nice.
Other than him levitating in the Batcave, that was a little weird.
That was a bit odd.
But you hear Martha. It's like that's important.
And I think the actual quote is really important. I wrote it down. He doesn't just say Martha. I mean, that would be kind of odd. He specifically says, the first thing he says is, "You're letting him kill Martha."
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like you were just saying, Daryl, that makes a big difference. It's not just, oh, what a coincidence.
I haven't heard that name in years.
Yeah, it's not something as pedestrian as that, but it's he repeats that a couple of times, and then almost, 10 seconds later, Lois Lane is right there explaining. It's his mom, and yeah, like you're saying, he's got a mother, and he's. And I wondered too, is that something else that the Ultimate Edition adds more to that scene? Because it seems like there's a lot. It made me feel like there was something cut out, because they go from that to talking more closely.
I don't think they talk more about that. To get super geeky on you, there is a potential for more cool stuff in the future, because, the Flash is going to get his own movie.
Yes.
Soon. And they've announced that they're calling that movie Flashpoint, which refers specifically to a series in the comics called Flashpoint, which has this alternate reality. And in that alternate reality, Batman is not Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne was the one who was killed. Batman is Thomas Wayne. And so if they're going to do Flashpoint, there's actually a chance that we could get to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who played Thomas Wayne in Batman vs. Superman, playing Batman in a Flashpoint movie. And apparently they've asked him about it recently, and he won't directly answer the question. So
I like everything you just said. That's fantastic.
Negan as Batman.
Well, and you know what? That version of Batman is a lot more like Negan. I could see that Batman carrying a stick with nails on it. That would be, oh man. And without, I don't want to give, we don't normally really care about spoilers on the Story Cauldron.
Yeah.
We kind of figure.
Most of the movies we do are
they've been out
fairly old. So.
But I don't want to spoil the turn there. I would love if they go the route with the Joker that the Flashpoint series takes.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Garrett has no idea.
Yeah.
So the
Garrett,
Joker is
to learn.
For you guys and for people out there, if you don't want to commit to reading the comics to hear that story, there's actually an animated movie called The Flashpoint Paradox, which is a good version of that story. So you can spend an hour and a half and get it. So
all right.
Sign me up. Although I do have a comic book hookup now that I'm here at college. And so they were like, oh, yeah, here's our card. Call us if you need anything. And now I'm like, I want to buy at least one comic book for every Story Cauldron podcast that involves a comic.
You're welcome.
So,
you came through with the Blade Runner comic, so
that's true.
That was pretty
Just
awesome.
wait until we get to Indiana Jones. Wink, wink.
Woo!
Oh, yeah.
You need to have Jay on when you get to Indiana Jones. That is his favorite movie is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, it's a good one.
Good, yeah. That's.
I'm so excited.
Fantastic!
Yeah,
I love it. So,
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to the end of the hour. Thanks for joining us today on the Story Cauldron. The music for the episode is from the band Hook Sounds, and the guest, once again, Daryl from the Story Geeks Podcast, I guess is where people can find you.
Yeah, you can find the Story Geeks Podcast on iTunes and Podbean, and for more information about everything else Jay and us all do, you can go to the reclamationsociety.org.
All right.
Fantastic. And if you are not already following us at the Story Cauldron on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, be sure to look for us. The Story Cauldron is our handle on most of those sites. We've almost cracked 100 followers on Instagram, which is pretty exciting.
All right.
We're almost there.
Yay! I love that. You can also find us on our website, www.thestorycauldron.com. You can learn more about us if you want our personal social medias and things like that. And also, don't forget to rate us on iTunes and or leave a review.
It helps other people find our podcast and just makes us feel all nice and warm and fuzzy, even though it's getting colder outside.
Say that, yes.
Yeah, so, well, until next time, bye.